Hi everyone, thank you for joining us over your lunch hour today for our webinar in sponsorship with EDR and NSBA. My name is Emily Mantler, WESC's Administrative Assistant. I'd like to give a big shout out to today's webinar sponsor, Peter Lucas Project Management. Our topic today is navigating changes, leveraging the opportunities professionally and personally, presented by Lynn Gao. If you have any questions for her as we go through the presentation, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A box, not the regular chat box. However, do feel free to use that regular chat box to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your business. And as always, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. You'll receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. With that, I'll pass it over to Lynn to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks very much and welcome everybody. So I'm just going to share my screen and make sure that we're good and that everybody can see that. So I want to thank everybody for taking some time out of their day, and then also for those folks that are watching the recording after the fact. My name is Lynn Gao, and I am on here certainly as owner of Design for Life Coaching and Consulting. It's a company that that I own, but also it's really my day job at the moment is working for Federated Co-op as a senior change management specialist at FCL in Saskatoon. So change management is a big part of my life, but certainly in the context of my business, we focus a lot more on individual change and personal change, but we're going to talk a little bit about both today. So today we'll sort of break it into two categories, and certainly feel free to put questions in or comments as we go through, and we'll try to cover those off at the end. We'll talk a little bit about personal change and the change curve, which I think most people or lots of people are actually familiar with. And if you're not sure if you are, you probably will once you see it. And we'll talk about not just the curve itself, but understanding the context. So there's changes that we go through. Some of them we initiate. Some of them happen to us. They're initiated by others or life or circumstances. And we don't plan for it upfront or expect it. And in fact, those kinds of changes sort of interrupt usually our lives in unexpected ways when we're maybe trying to create other changes. So we'll talk a little bit about the context in which we're introducing change and why that makes a difference. So when is it too much? So we'll talk a little bit about navigating obstacles that come up as we deal with change, but then also being able to recognize personally when it's a little bit at a tipping point and maybe it's just a bit too much, and what are some of the activities and the skills and the actions that I can take to build resilience and to actually support myself and those around me when it's too much change. And then we're going to shift into talking a little bit about supporting groups or teams through change. So this can be employees that you have in your business. It can be other team members. It can be family, our own families, as we navigate some changes in life, whether it's moving to a new home or a new city or making a job change. Certainly, I know everybody on almost every webinar or any presentation you go through will talk about the changes people have had to deal with over the last several years with COVID and school from home and working from home and all of those things. Of course, that's a big thing. But even over and above that, there's lots of things that we go through, not just ourselves, but for those people that we're connected to around us, the teams that we work with, and our friends and family as well. So how do we prepare for the changes that we know are coming or the changes we want to make? How do we help support and prepare the people around us? And the concept of everybody going through the changes at their own pace. Just because I'm really excited about something doesn't necessarily mean the people in my circle are feeling the same way. So how do we help identify that and then also show some leadership and support those people through that process? We'll talk a little bit about ADCAR, which is a ProSci tool. ProSci is an organization where there's lots of expertise and resources around change management. There's a real quick and easy tool that we've found really helpful to use with teams to help get a pulse about where everybody is in the process, and then some suggestions about how to focus your time and supports based on that. And then just sort of that concept of sustaining change. How many times do we make big changes in our lives personally, or you see in organizations or groups, and there's a big push to get it across the finish line, and then we don't put a lot of effort into what supports and practices we need to put in place to actually sustain that change, to have it become a real habit or integrate it into our lives. And we maybe just migrate back to behaviors or processes or ways of doing things that are familiar and the old way of doing things. So we actually don't actually sustain the change that we intended to make. So that's just, it feels like a lot, but we'll move through the material. Some of it may be quickly, but the slides will be sent out after this, and you'll have access to those. And also feel free to reach out to me as well after this webinar. My contact information will be on the material and at the end. Okay, so seems like a straightforward question, but just for the purposes of definition, so what is change? So change is a transition from a current state to a future state. So this is where we are, this is where we want to go, and in order to get there, there's a change that has to happen. And usually if we initiate any kind of change in our lives, in our routine, in our household, in our careers, in our work processes, it's to achieve a desired outcome. So there's a reason to make the change, because change is work and it's effort. And so in order to really do that, we have to understand why we're doing it. What is the desired outcome? So So then why is it so hard? So I'm not sure that I can actually see the chat, and what I would have said is for folks to throw some ideas in the chat, and maybe you can do that anyway, and we can check it out after we stop the presentation. But what are some of the reasons, or maybe you can just keep some notes for yourself off to the side. Why is it so hard? If what we're trying to accomplish is really going to be for our benefit, and it's something that we really want, and it's a desired outcome, then why is it so hard even for me to make that change, or to really get everybody else on board with moving through the change? So the question really, is it the change that's hard, or is it the journey to get to that future state that's hard? I love this cartoon that says, what if we don't change at all and something magical just happens? How many times do we just kind of hold our breath and wait and hope that somehow it's going to change around us without us having to really initiate anything or put any effort into that? Stuck in a rut, or just used to doing things in a certain way? Absolutely. So you can see it's not really the end state that is difficult, right? But it is, because it's a desirable state, it's where we want to be. The hard part is most often the transition. So it's not the future state, but it's the work and the transition to get there. And the comment in the chat was really accurate, right? It's such a habit. We're so ingrained with doing things in a certain way. There's other things that I would say too, sometimes fear of the unknown, or especially if you're taking a risk and moving outside of your comfort zone. Is it really going to work? It's all great and wonderful when it's a dream in our mind and we've got this great idea, and then jumping in and actually doing the work. There's a lot of emotions, or there's a whole process that we have to go through to actually move ourselves to that future state and do the work that needs to be done. So we'll revisit this, a couple of times in the slides, but I just wanted to introduce it here. So life rarely happens in a straight line. So this is the change curve. And you can see that when a change, especially, and these are sort of predictable stages that everybody goes through when there's a change. Even if we initiate it, it's just that we'll probably move through those first few stages pretty quickly if we've already thought them through, or we've come to the point that we're going to actually initiate the change. If it's something that's happened around us and it's a change that we've had to respond to, then certainly we're gonna spend more time up in those upfront stages. So shock or surprise that it's even happening. And I hate to always use COVID as an example, but let's just go back to 2020. It's funny, I was talking with a group the other day that I'm part of, and we had at the time moved to Zoom and said to ourselves, oh, we're just going to be doing this for the next few weeks. And I remember it was a big change, but we were all gung-ho. And then 2 years later, we're still meeting on Zoom, and we had a big conversation the other day about what do we want to do in person versus what do we want to do on Zoom. But in the beginning, it was shock, surprise that was even happening, and denial and disbelief, looking for evidence that, this isn't really true. It isn't that big of a deal. And then once you sort of accept the fact that this is something I'm going to have to actually respond to or deal with, there's a frustration, sometimes really anger, resentment that I have to deal with this. And comes out. And then once that sort of passes, there is often that depression or that low mood or that lacking in energy. It's just sort of, and you'll hear this talked about as sort of a resistance to change. We don't like to really use that word, or I don't really like to use the word resistance, because often it's a very logical and expected stage in the process where people are adapting to the fact that this is a new way of doing things, and the change is coming, and there's something I have to do about it. So we can talk about this on the personal level, from everything from being an empty nester. So I'll talk about situations that I'm used to. I'm a stepmom. We've had our kids with us from the time they were very little for summer visit, like 6 weeks in the summer, 2 weeks in the spring, 2 weeks at Christmas. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to have to adjust to being an empty nester when the kids are on their own, because I'm only used to having them certain times of the year. But you know what? It's not the truth, because I was used to these chunks of time. I was used to all three of them together, and they would all come and be. And then all of a sudden, when they were out on their own, I didn't know when I was going to see them. I didn't know and they were never coming together. And some of them, because we live in different provinces, some of them I see more frequently than others. And so first of all, there's the denial, like, that's not going to be a big deal for me. That's not going to affect me, that change. And then there was real frustration and resentment that I couldn't see them whenever I wanted, or I couldn't plan, and I didn't know. And maybe they had different plans over Christmas than to maybe come to our place. All those kinds of things, frustrations. And then I really went through a period where there was a real low mood and a lacking in energy. But then, and you can apply this to any change that you go through in your personal life, and also in your business and in your organization. But once you sort of accept the fact, not just necessarily mentally, because I always knew that that was a real thing, right, that I would have to adapt to, but emotionally really accept, like, okay, we're here and this is it. There's this experimental stage where you start kind of looking at things a bit differently and thinking, okay, what can I do? How can we do things differently? How can we connect differently? It's not so bad having some time, just my husband and I around a holiday. Maybe we can do something different. Maybe we can travel, etc. So you start to experiment with different ways of doing things. And then there's a real point of decision where you say, okay, this is going to, I'm moving forward, right? So it's a letting go of what was and a moving forward into what's to come. And then as part of that, you learn how to work in a new situation. You start to look for the opportunities. You start, instead of looking back and saying, it wasn't like this before, or I wish it was like this, or I miss when it was like that. You start to imagine what it could be like. And then there's a real integration where the changes are integrated and there's actually a renewal. And you'll actually notice that this part of the curve is higher than where you started. So the competencies or the abilities or the capabilities are really increased at the end of that. So it's really a desired outcome. And so, but this process takes time. You'll see that this is also, based on the grief work of Kubler-Ross's grief work, and a lot of those stages are similar because changes often can be perceived as a loss when something changes. So it's important to understand your own change needs. So the goal is not to get rid of the curve because we're all going to go through it. The goal is to understand, what do I need when I'm going through this change, so that I can minimize how long it's going to take to go through that curve and how far down I'm going to go or how difficult it's going to be. So reducing the depth and the duration of the curve is the goal. So let's talk a bit about the journey. So it's hard because often when we have a good idea, so we're going to do a home reno, and we're going to create a bump out on the back, and we're going to redo the kitchen. We did this a couple of years ago, and it's all very exciting, and we initiated the change. But often you don't anticipate, they say the devil's in the details, how hard the work is actually going to be. Or you maybe sometimes are implementing somebody else's vision. I thought we were all on the same page. I remember when my husband and I went to buy our first house, and we were looking at houses, and I was all excited, and I thought we were 100% on the same page with what we were looking for. Come to find out, I was looking for turnkey. He was looking for a project, someplace where he could take down a wall, where he could build something and customize it. So again, there's a lot of assumptions along the way when we're initiating the change. So then you deal with that and you come up with a plan. Okay, this is how we're going to do it. You talk it through, you figure it out. These are the steps. And even with a plan, life is supposed to go this way, right? That's that 5-year strategic plan that we're here, and that's where we're going to be, and here are our goals and here are our objectives. But then this is how life actually goes. We don't have time here today for me to talk to you about my own life journey and my numerous career changes, and but this is really a pretty good picture of my professional journey as well as my personal journey. So and once we sort of accept that that's the case, then we can start to adapt and deal with things in a different kind of way. So it's important to know that when we're making changes or when we're progressing in our careers or we're setting goals, that it's natural that there are obstacles along the path. So we've already said that growth is never in a straight line. Any type of evolution actually requires obstacles. Overcoming those obstacles and problem solving and figuring those things out is a natural part of growth and change. It's only when we think they shouldn't be there, or that when we run into an obstacle that there's something wrong, that we get stuck. So Scott Peck wrote a book, over 25 years ago now, called Road Less Traveled. Very first line in the book says life is difficult. And then he says life is less difficult when we accept the fact that it's a series of problems to be solved. So obstacles are a necessary part of that journey. So if we're choosing the adventure, we actually, the adventure provides resistance that helps build strength, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical. So if you think about going to the gym or working out or trying to build capabilities or make some changes on the physical level, what do? You add resistance, right? So that you can build and strengthen those muscles. So if you think about these obstacles, you can think about them in terms of resistance to help build our capabilities to deal with mental challenges and shifts in perspective, and emotionally moving outside our own comfort zone, which builds our own capability and our own sense of self-esteem. And so obstacles are actually part of the journey. So as you build that strength, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual strength, and you do that over time, you actually increase your own power as an individual, as a leader, and your strength to face other obstacles that come down the path. So let's talk a little bit about context. So what else is changing? So when we talk about managing through change, we're usually thinking about one change. But all we have to think about is what else is going on around us. So organizationally, there are usually lots of changes. I don't know about you, but every organization I've ever worked for, especially in the last 10 years, the pace of change has been increasing exponentially on all levels, in all areas of the business. And so there's usually not just one change happening, but there's usually multiple changes happening in our organizations or in your business as you're trying to grow your business. I'm guessing that there are changes happening on multiple fronts. But let's layer on top of that the reality of the changes that are happening globally. And I don't think we can underestimate the effect that some of these global things that are happening, even though we may think that they're not directly affecting us, but things from climate change to the war in Ukraine to the pandemic and all of those things, they are sort of like noise in the background, pressures and challenges, and some of them will affect us more than others, but it definitely should be added into the mix when you think about the context within we're working. People are tired today, stressed, and really going through a lot and carrying a lot. And so it's important to recognize that when something that, and even for me 5 years ago, that would be no big deal, takes a lot more effort today just because of all of the things that have been happening in our world and in our communities and around us. And then there's personal change, right? So when you think about all of these things layered on top, it's important, and especially when you're implementing change for people on your team or your families, is to think about what you're asking of them, but also what is their context? What else are you introducing the change into? So there's an accumulation of change, which can actually add to some of the stressors and physical, emotional, again, and in other areas of my life that I just start to feel overwhelmed because there's so much that I'm juggling. So it's something to pay attention to. It's something to acknowledge for yourself. And something to talk about with your teams, your employees, your families, other people that are in your circle. So just to go back and look at the change curve briefly, and just to say that in the normal process of change, there are definitely obstacles along the way. There's definitely peaks and valleys. And the other thing I'll say about this dip at the bottom of low mood or depression or lacking of energy, it's not like you necessarily just go through that once. Depending on the size of the change, you could move up that curve, do some experimentation, and fall back into that. You can go from that sadness back into that anger. So there are some illustrations out there of the change curve that have a bit of a circle in here, because it can be a little bit of a cycle, but eventually through normal change, people move out of that into integration. But sometimes people get stuck. So how do you know if you're stuck? Or people around you who you care about are feeling stuck and are not navigating through those obstacles? What are some of the signs that people are really struggling with change? So you may notice changes in your body. Can be stomach, headaches, muscle tension, inability to sleep. My stress response is to sleep. So that's not an issue for me, but my husband under stress wakes up multiple times in the night. So very important, something to pay attention to. So changes in feelings. So we're not just talking about periodic days when you feel this way, but we're talking about something that's maybe sustained over a period of time, or that you really just don't feel that you're able to navigate out of. So irritation, impatience, low mood, depression, cynicism. And so that's sort of being in the dip of that curve and really having difficulty climbing out the other side. Changes in your thinking. So trouble concentrating, low morale, inability to make decisions. I mean, I have moments like that where I'll come out of my home office at the end of the day and my husband will ask me what I want for dinner. And I just say, I can't make a decision. I need you to decide, because I just am up to here with what has happened. But these items are not necessarily for those one-off days. This is sustained over a period of time. Or changes in behavior. You know, isolation or reduced risk taking, not talking about what's really going on. Obviously, substance abuse, we all have comforts that we leverage when we're going through stressful times, but for some people that can cross the line, and it can be for us as well, where we need to just sort of pay attention to that. Or avoidance of work, or increased conflict with people around us, where it really doesn't have anything to do with them, but our reaction is disproportionate to what's going on because of what we're carrying, and really struggling with change. So we're zipping through this, and this is not a topic to necessarily zip through, but there is a handout that's going to come after, and it'll be sent out to folks as a result of this, around those same characteristics and some thoughts about building resilience. So what is resilience? So resilience is the capacity to respond to and prosper from stressful circumstances, because there actually is, through, we've talked about these obstacles along the path, through change, there is opportunity. And how do we actually take that stress and actually prosper through it? And that ability to bounce back. And it's by building up our resilience and being healthy and well despite all of the demands of life. And as we develop that, build that muscle of resilience, and then we're better able to deal with those challenges that come and actually can leverage those opportunities. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because we've got a number of slides to go through on the group side, but and there's a handout that'll come with this with more detail about each of these categories, but building strong relationships is essential. I just heard a comment on CBC this morning. They were interviewing somebody who was talking about, for seniors or people over 50, they actually suggest that you make one new friend a year, because as you age, your circle gets smaller, you lose people in your life, your younger members of your family move on and they develop their own life. So making sure that you proactively are creating new relationships and building strong relationships, very important for resilience. Putting things in perspective. Again, when I'm going through a stressful time, I can hyper focus on the things that are scary or stressful or frustrating, but looking at that within the bigger context of I've gone through these types of things before, I have the skills to navigate them. And for me, being an extrovert, I actually need to process that externally, and that's for me where those strong relationships come in. For introverts or others, those are also good, but there's other tools around that in terms of journaling or writing, or actually exercises to help put things in perspective and remember the bigger picture. Staying focused and goal-oriented is another important skill in terms of resilience. I heard Jeff Bridges interviewed on CBS Sunday Morning a few weeks ago, and he had cancer and COVID in the last couple of years, and was really, he said the doctors were saying to him, you need to fight, Jeff, you need to fight, you're not fighting. And he said, fight. He said, man, he said, I was in surrender mode. But his daughter was getting married, and she talked to him and said, you know, Dad, I want you there to walk me down the aisle. So he said he focused on that, not on getting well, beating COVID, you know, beating cancer, But on that one goal, which was to be at his daughter's wedding, and he focused on that, and he got well, and he walked her down the aisle and danced with her at the wedding, and they showed a video. So it's a real important skill in terms of resilience, is finding those goals that are short-term and achievable and staying focused on those. Always looking for the opportunity for self-discovery. When we go through difficult times, there's a learning there. There's something I can learn about myself, capabilities that I didn't even know I had, and ways of dealing with things, or even identifying fears that I didn't know I had, and then taking steps to overcome those fears. So it is also an opportunity for some real self-discovery, which again can happen in the context of relationships or learnings or counseling or coaching or other ways to actually learn how to leverage that as an opportunity. And again, this goes along with perspective, but choosing how you see those situations. And building in that self-care. I had an appointment the other day with a integrative medicine consultant, and he was asking me about what I did to take care of myself on a daily basis, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, what I did for fun. And, you know, I had a hard time. I know what I used to do for fun pre-COVID, and those things, a lot of those things have gone away, at least in the short term. But I started to realize, you know, there's work I need to do here. I work a lot. I work from home. I work long hours. I have my business on the side. But I need to build that time in and actually schedule that for self-care. It's not a nice to have. It's an essential capability for building resilience. And understanding that change is a natural part of life. So I used to think, and you know, I'm not going to speak for other people, but I used to think when I was younger, okay, when I graduate, then everything will be good. When I'm married, when I have a family, when I have this type of job, when we have this house. But the truth is, there's always a next step. There's always another change. Change is actually a natural part of life. And to go back to what Scott Peck has said, life is a series of problems to be solved. So focusing on those things can help. And building resilience is not a one and done. It's an activity that we work at slowly over time, and we build that resilience muscle. So this is just an activity that'll be sent out in the handout, and it's just an option for folks to think about, but consider a challenging change that you're currently experiencing, and then looking at what emotions am I feeling, what behaviors and thoughts am I demonstrating, and where are you on the change curve? So that will that'll be sent out in addition to the resilience information after this session. So the other thing that's important for me are those practices and supports. So a practice is obviously doing something regularly in order to be able to do it better. So this really feeds into that concept of how do I sustain the change? You know, what things will I do on an ongoing basis to make sure that I'm taking care of myself, that I'm building that resilience, and build that into my life. So for me, because I'm working from home, I've had to make a conscious decision to get up from my desk and walk. It sounds like a simple thing, but when I was in the office, I was walking every day in between floors, you know, down to the cafe, out to the coffee shop across the street, or off to somebody else's office. And those simple steps through the day magically go away when I'm behind my desk. No time between meetings because they're all online meetings, right? Jumping from one to the other. So I've had to build in some practices, an at-home yoga practice and other things to take care of myself. If you're not seeing people, again, I've had to make conscious decisions and choices to connect with people and to maintain and build those relationships. So what are those practices for you that you need to be building in to your life to help you navigate through change? And then what supports? So a support means to bear the weight of, or to keep from falling, sinking, or slipping. to give confidence or comfort? What are your supports? You know, we can't do this. I was always one of those people who I'm going to power through and I'm going to take care of things. But what are those supports that you can build into your life to help you? And when we think about this on the other side, and we'll talk about this from a group perspective, what supports can you build in for your teams and your people? What practices can you build into your business or to your family life to help everybody have those things that is going to help for them to build resilience and navigate change? Okay, so we'll take a couple of minutes and talk about preparing groups for change. So alignment and engagement, build agreement and understanding. That goes back to, I thought we were all on the same page. That's not necessarily the case. So checking in with others to make sure they understand what's changing, why we're changing, and that we're all on the same page. And alongside of that is keeping people informed if things start to shift and move as part of what's changing. It's essential for people to feel like they're part of what's happening. And lots of times, if I'm the person who's initiating the change, I think that everybody is on the same page with me, but I may be 5 steps ahead because I'm the one who started it. So very important to check in with others and keep that communication flowing. Depending on what's changing, there may be skills or abilities that people need support in or training to help prepare them to be proficient or successful with what the change is that's coming. And the other tool for groups is coaching. So that's that ongoing support and encouragement. It really aligns with that first step, which is alignment and engagement, which you maybe would do more upfront, but the ongoing coaching, even once that change has been implemented, is also an important tool to help prepare and sustain that change. So if we talk about going from current to future and then that transition phase in between, if we think about that in terms of groups, that current state is we're not just one group moving through this change. We're a group of individuals that are moving through the change. And not everybody goes through the change at the same pace. So somebody may be well into that transition and other people are holding back and still in that, oh, this isn't really happening, or I don't have to deal with this, or, you know, and really not engaging and moving forward. And then others are already into future state. So you can see that as we move through this, and I've heard a colleague of mine used to call this the Swiss cheese approach to navigating change. But it's very important to be aware of the fact that people are at different stages in this process, and they'll need different types of supports and different types of leadership as they move through this. So change needs, this graph actually can be looked at in a couple of different ways. This can be one change, and each one of these lines can be different people. So you can see that people move through that change curve differently. And so it's very important to acknowledge that, be aware of that, and be able to respond to that. The other thing is, this could be the same person. So this can be me, but I'm going to react to different changes differently. Some changes are going to be quick and easy for me, and other changes are going to be a lot longer and a lot more difficult for me. And so just when you're thinking about your own journey, be conscious of where you are on the change curve. Context will make a difference. The type of change it is will make a difference. The kind of supports you have, the history you have. If it's a change that's similar to what you've gone through before, then it didn't turn out well, then it's going to be a lot more difficult. So I'm going to react a lot differently to different types of changes. So what does your team need from you? Not to be this kind of a leader, right? I don't want to change. I want all of you to change. And, you know, it's funny, but the truth is that, you know, it happens, right? So it's important that there's alignment as a leader, that you provide the alignment, that the messaging is clear, that if something is the #1 priority, then everybody knows it's the #1 priority. And depending on how large the organization is, I don't know if, I've certainly been in organizations where from the top, they'll say, this is a priority, and this is what we need to be working on. But then the supervisor is saying, this is your priority. And then you've got people in the front line who are getting conflicting messages about what's important. And so if you really want people to be focused on the change, then it's important that there's alignment and clear consistency in the messaging. Also, motivation. I'm on a large project at the moment, and the leader in that project on the various meetings will frequently say, we haven't done this before. This is hard. We're not going to do it perfectly. Everybody's doing good work. Thank you for your time. And you know, I never get tired of hearing that. It's strong motivation from that leader who is present and visible. So if you look through the change management materials and ProSci and others, they'll always say consistent and visible leadership, which really aligns to motivation, is one of the #1 things you need in order to bring people through a change. And obviously modeling. And modeling is just not a leader who is doing really well at change, but it can be like the leader I just mentioned who says, this is hard, right? Acknowledging the difficulty, acknowledging that we're not going to do it perfectly, acknowledging that it is hard for other people and that it's work. That's really modeling. And if there's an opportunity as a leader, depending on who you are, you know, Brene Brown talks a lot about vulnerability, being able to talk about your own struggles with change and what's worked for you, but where it's been difficult for you, can actually help people relax into that and acknowledge that it can be difficult for them too, but because they see their leader navigating that, then they're much more open to doing it themselves. And the other really important message here is that everybody is a leader because everyone influences someone. So when we talk about leaders, we're not just talking about organizational leaders or directors or owners of companies or parents in families for that matter. We're talking about everybody. So leadership is not a position on the organizational chart. So it's important that we all work to support each other around alignment, motivation, and modeling. So resiliency and leadership together. That means facing a situation head on and not denying the fact that it's happening or that we need to really look at it. Don't overanalyze. If you're initiating a change, you're not going to, the message again that our program manager said, which is, it's not going to be perfect, but we're going to start moving. So there's a certain amount of preparation work that you can do, but because life doesn't happen in a straight line, there's still going to be unknowns with almost every change. And so it's important to plan, but it's also important to do and to start moving forward so people really know that it's real and that the change is happening. Accept that mistakes are part of any change and reinforce that clearly and out loud, and encourage people to talk about those mistakes and bring them forward so they can be resolved quickly and people feel supported through that process. And as a leader, don't be afraid to ask for help. Other groups, other organizations, other support. WESC as an organization was a huge help to me initially in starting my business. I had lots of questions and lots of areas that I'm well-versed in and competent, and other areas that were brand new to me because I had never started my own business. So very important to rely on others and others' experience and learn from others and reach out for help. And by dealing with change yourself, for those around you, you will provide alignment, motivation, and modeling. And always important to come back to the why. Why are we changing? That message can't get lost. Sometimes when we get in the middle of all of the work, we lose sight of the future state of the goal, why we're doing it all. So coming back to that message all the time about why becomes really important. Okay, a quick view on ADCAR. So this will be in the slides that get sent out to you. So, and you can also Google or visit ProSci, and there's lots of information there with regards to ADCAR. So ADCAR is really an acronym for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So as I move through any change, the first thing is I become aware of what's changing. And sort of get that sense of, oh, this is happening. And then in order for me to develop the desire for it or to really change, I have to be willing and have that desire to see that be a successful change. Awareness is not enough. And so from awareness, most people move through to some level of desire to make it successful and make it work. And then they usually need more information or knowledge about the change. And possibly some training or some question about, do they really have the ability to be successful? And then what kind of supports can we put in place to help with that? And then again, reinforcement. So one of the things that we did, many years ago, actually, in a company that I worked for, is there was a big organizational change happening within the department that I worked for. And the leaders had done a lot of planning, and they had done a lot of thinking through about how this was going to happen. They had done communication out. There'd been emails and lunch and learns and all that kind of stuff about the change. And then we did a bit of a check-in with the staff, and we brought everybody together, and we did a bit of a poll, and we explained these stages, and we said, with relative to this change, where are you on this list? And the leaders were blown away because people were all over the place. Some people were just at the awareness stage. Some people, were at the desire stage, and some people felt that they needed training, and maybe they were at the ability stage, but that nobody was at reinforcement. Nobody was all the way there. And leaders, because often leaders are much further along in the process because they've been planning it, thinking about it, and haven't given their people time to catch up. It's important to understand that people can be at different places. So awareness is what is changing, when is it changing? First thing you need to make sure that everybody is aware. For people to really have a desire to be successful with the change, they need to understand the why. Why are we changing? Why is it important for the business? Why is it important for the family? Why is it important for our church group or our club or what the group? And then with them is a change management term that means what's in it for me. So what is the value proposition for that person, for that individual? What is it? And for some people, it's enough to be able to say, this is going to be good for the business, and so I'm in. For some people, they have to say, well, how is it going to make a difference for me in my role? And so that becomes important to really feed that desire. And do we know enough about the change in order for me to contribute and to help it be successful? And do we have the skills and capabilities? So is there training required? Are there other supports? Is there job sharing? Is there coaching? Is there other things that need to happen in order to actually help prepare people for that future state? In reinforcement, do we have the supports in place to make sure that we sustain the change? Because you're only going to realize the benefits of that change if we actually sustain it. So putting it all together, change is happening all around us. Successful change depends on people, both leaders and those that are affected by the change. People react and embrace change at different rates. So that's really critical to remember, especially if you're supporting others. And leaders need to lead their teams through the change, understand what's changing, who's impacted, prepare individuals, and support continued adoption of the change. So just to summarize some of the messages from today. So just want to say thank you for creating space and time for yourself today to attend this webinar, and for taking a thoughtful approach to change, and for letting me be part of your day today. So that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Oh, I guess there were some sound issues, so I don't know if that got fixed. Hopefully it did. And I don't know if there are any questions. I don't see the Q&A panel, so I'll just open it up now. And I don't know if Emily or others want to indicate if there's any questions or comments or anything else you need from me today. Yeah, reinforcement, really important. It's not a one and done. Okay. Well, I don't see anything, Emily. Okay, that's great. Thanks. Appreciate that, everybody. And I guess you've got stuff that you can send out. I'll turn that over to you. And my contact information is there if anybody needs anything.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Lynn, for the informative presentation, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Just a reminder, you'll be able to view this webinar on demand on our website by the end of the day. Our next webinar is The Path to Entrepreneurship, Is There a Right Way? And that's part of our Business Growth Luncheon series, and it's presented by Dr. Christine Beck on July 27th. So, or June 27th, I mean. So that's next week. And yeah, so thank you everyone again for joining. I'll see you later and have a great afternoon.